Okay, so I think we've given time for people to log on and get into their teams, and we'll make a start with today's webinar. Just a few small housekeeping announcements I'll give first of all, just to let everybody know that we are recording the session, and that's made available to people afterwards. So bear that in mind, and please, if you could keep your cameras off and your microphone off, although that probably is already disabled for you in the way Teams works. So this next webinar is following on from the very successful events that we had in Glasgow last week. So we had our second annual event, and I think there's a few people here who are with us in Glasgow. We learned lots about the Coastal network itself and from a lot of participants then. But this is a really exciting opportunity to hear about something different and broader from that. So Charlie Thompson from the Channel Coastal Observatory is joining us today to give the webinar, and she's going to be talking about strategic coastal monitoring, a resource for resilience. And I think this is a really exciting opportunity. I had a sneak preview of the slides, and it's a really exciting opportunity to find out more about the data that's available and how that can be shared and used among people. So I think this is a really valuable contribution to what we're doing in the network, and really looking forward to hearing from Charlie today. So if I could just ask everybody, if you have questions, you can use the Q&A function, and feel free to add it in there. Although we do know that some people won't see the Q&A function, so you can also just use the chat. And feel free to type in questions at any time, and I'll ask those to Charlie at the end. So I'd really encourage you, if during the presentation you have questions and thoughts that you'd like Charlie to pick up on, put that into the chat or the Q&A function, and I'll pick that up at the end for you. But other than that, I will stop talking and let Charlie take over and tell you all about strategic coastal monitoring. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to talk at this webinar. What I want to do this afternoon is to give a bit of an introduction to the National Network of Regional Coastal Monitoring Programmes of England, which is our strategic coastal monitoring programme. I'm going to say a little bit about kind of how the programme evolved and why, and then give an overview of the type of data that we've got available, the type of kind of analysis and reports that you've got access to, and just a kind of general overview of what's available to you and why that's relevant to people working in resilience. So I think I recognise some of the names as people have been logging on. So apologies that if I am teaching to the converted, but hopefully everyone will learn maybe something new about the monitoring programme, even if you are kind of aware of what we do and already using the data. Okay, so the strategic monitoring in England really rose out of the initial work that was done preparing for the shoreline management plans. So historically, there have been a lot of localised or regional coastal monitoring programmes and projects, but the data for those was usually privately held. They used a variety of different methods. They saved their data in different formats. They collected data to different specifications. And what that meant was that much of the data from those local projects was often not available, or when it was available, not easily comparable to data kind of across boundaries or in other areas. And there was an acknowledgement when developing the shoreline management plans that really need a much more kind of standardised and strategic approach to coastal monitoring. And the one that we've got is a kind of a structure where there's regional management but national coordination. And the idea is that we've got consistency around the country, transparency in what we do, how we collect the data and how we process it. And our monitoring is risk-based, so that we can monitor across a range of different scales dependent on the needs of the communities. So the National Network of Coastal Monitoring Programmes is made up of 6 regional programmes, which are mapped onto the Coastal Group Network of England, which in itself is built around the sediment cell concept of England. And we work together to make sure that we're providing that kind of strategic and coordinated monitoring data that the community needs. Now, essentially what we're trying to do is provide the evidence that's needed to underpin flood and coastal erosion risk management, which means that we need to provide data types which can support kind of 3 different scales of decision making. So firstly, we need to be able to underpin the kind of long-term high-level assessments of risk and identification of policies of how to manage the coastline that's needed by the shoreline management planning process itself. We also ideally can provide the evidence to investigate kind of how to achieve those policies on the ground, and also the more detailed information that's needed for the design, implementation and monitoring of schemes once they have been decided on. At every level here, you need really good evidence of dynamic processes in our coastline, which means that you need a time series of data to really assess how things have been changing. So the idea is that we have a standardized program, which means wherever you are around the English coastline, you've got access to the same data types that are collected to the same standards. A repeatable one, which means that we are building up a really long time series now of data. The national network has existed in its current form since 2011, but many of the regions within that programme have been monitoring for much, much longer. So we've got in many areas over 20 years worth of data. And the other key is it does have to be cost effective and targeted, because it is being funded via DEFRA through the Environment Grant in Aid. So what we do is we work really closely with the risk management authorities, with coastal managers, with engineers, to make sure that we're delivering the kind of information and data that they need and that they want in order to make their decisions. And because we are funded through the EA, all of our data is available through the Open Government Licence. And our ethos is that we want everything to be openly available to anyone for any purpose. So all of the data can be downloaded from our website, but equally so can all of the analysis, any reports that we write. Basically everything is available for you to use however you might want to use it. All we ask is that you let us know that you are doing that. Okay, so the kind of model that we work on when we are thinking about what we want to be monitoring is based off a fairly simple source, pathway and receptor model. So in our case, the source is the drivers of coastal change. So we're talking about the waves, the tides, the meteorological conditions. The receptor is the response that we're seeing at the coastline, whether that's a change in the position of the shoreline or the volume of the beach, whether that's a change in habitat or kind of damage that occurs during the storm events. And then the pathways is the mechanisms through which that occurs, so erosion, accretion, flooding and processes like that. Through that, we've established 2 different survey networks. So we have a hydrodynamic network that provides near real-time data on those drivers. So we have network of wave buoys, tide gauges and met stations, so we can understand what the drivers of the coastal change are. And then we have our kind of on the ground survey network, which is measuring and monitoring the response that we're seeing at the coastline. What we don't do directly in most cases is monitor the pathways or the mechanisms. And that's because as a strategic programme, we're not really operating at the right scale to do that. But in a lot of cases, the pathways, the mechanisms can be inferred through our knowledge of the drivers and the responses. Or we do work very closely with research projects, with universities, with other researchers to kind of help them to understand more about the pathways and the mechanisms, and then that feeds into the design of the programme as well. So we have these two survey networks, which provides us with a huge amount of data sets, which are available for you guys to download. So this is just an overview. I won't go through now, but I will in a second just kind of review all of the different types of data that we have available and that you can get access to. I'm not quite sure what's happened there. But the first thing that I wanted to mention was actually the risk-based approach that I spoke about earlier. Now, as a strategic programme, we can't monitor everywhere all the time as much as we might want to. So what we have to do is assess which are the key areas that need monitoring and at what frequency and what type of monitoring is best to undertake in those areas. So essentially, the entire coastline has been divided up into a series of management units, which map pretty closely onto the shoreline management plan units as well. These are determined based on process, and then we assess the assets that are at risk within each of those units, the exposure level of those to waves, so how energetic is that environment, the risk of flooding from tides. We look at the underlying geology and geomorphology, so what is the potential for erosion, what are the current defence types that are already in place. And then, of course, we look also at the shoreline management plan policy options that are currently in place for each of these survey units. And what that allows us to do is to determine the type of monitoring that we might want to do for each of these units and also the frequency at which we'll do that. So this might go from an extreme of a kind of a survey unit that's deemed high risk, which might get full topographic surveys twice a year, down to an area which is low risk. So there are few assets that are being protected, or there's very little change that we've observed over time. They might only get a baseline survey once every 5 years, just so that we can keep on top of kind of any changes that might start happening again in the future. But kind of it doesn't need to be surveyed quite as frequent. And of course, we regularly review the risk in each of these units to make sure that we are taking account of the fact that we're working in a dynamic environment where these kind of risks might be changing, especially in the context of climate change. But also because our definition of a risk may be changing as we approach coastal management in different ways. For example, as we move from an ethos of defence to one of resilience and adaptation to coastal change. So we do these survey reviews roughly every 10 years or so, and also when we kind of review the programme when we're going for another round of funding. But essentially what we do is we look at the coastal processes that are kind of at work there. So this is just an example where we've looked at the changes in shoreline position and how variable those changes are, and the same for kind of difference in beach behaviour, so volume of the beach, change in elevation. We also, of course, look at the management and policy that's in place, and particularly where there might be areas in which that policy is set to change, say from a hold the line to a managed realignment site. And then we can look at both the magnitude of risk for a particular unit and the balance of the kind of the risk that comes from the processes and the risk that comes from the management strategy. And we can use that to determine any changes that are needed to our survey regime. And we do this alongside the risk management authorities to make sure that we're capturing kind of the frequencies and resolution of data that they really need. In terms of the data itself, I'm going to go through kind of the key data types that we make available, but there are some others on the website as well, so it is worth having a look and or asking us if you're after something in particular. But one of our kind of staple data sets is a topographic survey, which we use to determine the volume of our beaches. The way we've done that over the years has changed a lot, and we continue to use a variety of different methods to collect this type of data. So whether it's walked GPS surveys, drones, terrestrial laser scanning, or laser scanners on ATVs even. The key for us is that the data is all collected to the same standard. And so we don't, the method of collection is based more on the logistics of doing the survey than anything else. We also have, in some of the regions, we have our own control network in place, particularly in the southeast and the southwest. We've installed a large number of control points, which is something that often people aren't aware of, but we have full information on any of those if you'd like to use them for your own surveys as well. And the standard data output that we have from this is beach profiles. So I'm just showing you here an example of a first to last change in profile, where you can see the changes in kind of technology that have allowed a much greater resolution of data over time, but you can still see the changes that have happened in the profile shape and the cross-sectional area here between those two surveys, which are just over a decade apart. But as well as the profile data, we do hold archives of things like our point clouds from our laser scan survey. So this is just an example of, this is overlaid a pre and post landslide. So you can see we fly through the landslide in this animation that we have. Now we don't, at the moment, this data isn't downloadable because, in all honesty, most people don't have the kind of software that's needed to process it and to deal with it. But what we are doing is we're currently working to find ways to better make this sort of data available online, so that people can view it, and then if they would like a copy of the original data set, then they can contact us for that or download it directly as well. But what we do from all of these, even the very high res surveys, is extract profiles from those so that we have these very long data sets of profile change. We also we also report on these changes regularly. So we do annual reports on changes in things like cross-sectional area or beach volume, and try and put that into context of change over the whole data set that we have. And all of those reports are also available freely and are particularly useful, I think, if you maybe don't have as much time to get into the data yourself, but you want an overview of how things might have changed over the duration that we've been monitoring them. We're also very aware that coastal change doesn't stop at mean low water springs, and so we have been collecting a lot of bathymetry data, and in particular what we've been trying to do is fill in what's kind of generally known as the white ribbon. So this is that part of the subtidal which is lower than you can survey on foot from shore, but is also too shallow to kind of get to easily from boats. We've been doing this in conjunction with the MCA in a lot of cases, and I'm very happy to be able to say that I think as of next year, all going well, we should have entirely filled the white ribbon for England. And this will mean that we'll have multi-beam surveys for around all of the coast of England. The kind of cost and time that's taken in producing these multi-beam surveys means that we don't always have long time series of this, but we do have repeat surveys in specific areas where there's a particular FSUM need, and that might be actually repeat single beam surveys rather than multi-beam surveys. And what we're doing now as we kind of complete that white ribbon is we are trying to do repeat surveys now of the multi-beam as well. So this example that I've got in screen is actually a repeat survey that we have around Sept on the southeast. And you can see it produces some really high quality data. It's all to the CHP spec, so it's very high spec, and we're still continuing to discover interesting things. This is an example of some cannons that were seen in a multi-beam survey that we undertook in the East Solent, and we were able to notify the license holder of the wreck that these came from, so they can keep track of these through our surveys as well. So a really useful resource kind of beyond the FSUM community and for heritage as well. We also have a regular LiDAR survey regime. So this provides elevation data as well. It's less frequent, it's roughly every 2 years, depending on where around the country you're looking. And that frequency tends to be higher in very high risk areas. So East Riding of Yorkshire, for example, have LiDAR every 6 months. And it's lower resolution, obviously, than the topographic surveys that we undertake, but is more synoptic. The data is 1 meter horizontal resolution for the more recent, 2 meter for the old data, and we provide both filtered and unfiltered versions of that with very good vertical accuracy. And this is collected for us via the EA's geomatics team, which we're very grateful for. And is particularly useful for those areas where topographic survey on the ground is not logistically very easy. And we also have regular aerial photography and habitat mapping as well. So our aerial photography occurs roughly every 3 years. Again, it depends a little bit regionally, depending on risk. It's all ortho-rectified. Many regions will have obliques flown at the same time, and many of the data sets will also be collecting force colour infrared, which is particularly useful for habitat purposes. It's 10 centimetre ground sampling distance, so it's very high resolution, much higher than you'll get from things like Google Maps. And this allows us to undertake habitat mapping on that aerial photography data, which we get done roughly every 6 years, which meets the kind of reporting requirements that we have in this country. So that kind of gives an overview of the response side of things. Obviously, we need to be monitoring the drivers as well, which is where our hydrodynamics network comes in. So here you can just see some maps of the locations of our various instrumentation and an indication of how long the data sets are as well. So in terms of wave buoys, we've got 37 actually wave buoys deployed at the moment. They're all Datawell Mark III directional wave riders, and it's been the same model for the entire time. So this is the most consistent data set I think that we have. They provide data in near real time, so at 30-minute intervals, but you can also get much higher resolution, high frequency data from the website. We have data sets that exceed 20 years in many locations, particularly in the South Coast. The idea of these is they're in locations that allow us to characterise that nearshore wave climate, which is very difficult to model, to aid in design of coastal defences, to help with the evaluation of beach management plans. They're also often used in the validation of numerical models, and they feed into the forecasting and prediction. So, for example, the surge models to assess risk. We also have tide gauges around the country, again in near real time, 10-minute interval, and with a record length exceeding 20 years in some locations. We don't have as many of these, and that's because we're working alongside the National Tide and Sea Level Facility, so the national tide gauges that are in place. And the idea is that ours have been installed to supplement that long-term facility in areas where there is a particular FSERM need that wasn't being met. And our MET stations were always designed to provide data in tandem with the tide gauges, so we've got the barometric pressure in order to interpret those, and again give data in near real time at 10-minute resolution. But actually what we're finding is that these are becoming of more interest as a standalone data set as well, and we're getting more requests for additional MET station and MET data in many areas. And then new for this year, or for this phase of monitoring, is our Coastal Defence Asset Register. So we've been developing a database which will become a single point of reference for coastal defence assets, regardless of ownership. So whether they are Environment Agency owned, local authority owned, or in private ownership or orphaned. And this will allow us to provide information, including where it's available, condition grades in a consistent format, so that they can be downloaded or reviewed to give us a national picture of the condition of our defence assets. This is a work in progress, so we're kind of putting this together during this phase, and we're hoping that it will be completed by 2027. But we can interrogate the database as it stands. We can see, for example, that currently of those of the assets that we have in the database, about 8% of them have been a condition grade of 4 or 5, which is poor, which might be of concern. But equally, about 35% of the assets in the database don't have an associated condition grade with them, which means that at the moment we don't know what condition that they are in. And one of the things that we will do as we continue the monitoring programme is try and fill in the condition grades so that we can get a better idea of the condition of our coastal defence assets around the country, to better understand the scale of maintenance needed and the level of protection that they are providing. From all of the data there that we've been collecting for many years now, we also provide a number of reports, analysis, and other resources that might be useful for people. So, for example, we have a storm calendar that provides a figure like this for any storm which breaches the 1 in 1 year return period for any of our wave buoys. So you've got an example here. It indicates the return period of the wave height, but also how many hours from high water that hit, and also provides a tidal coefficient, which puts that into the context of the kind of tidal level that's associated with. So in this particular example from December last year, you can see here that we have a very high wave height return period that hits within about an hour of high water at a tidal coefficient that coincides with something like a moderate spring. And the idea of this is that it allows some kind of context in terms of how big an event something was, but also allows us to investigate the spatial footprint of storms and how they're impacting our coastline. We also look at bimodality in our seas. We have a report about that, and we have an continuing updated spreadsheet which looks at the level of bimodality in the seas around England at each of our wave buoys, because we know that that can influence flood risk. As I mentioned earlier, we have annual survey reports on all our topographic surveys. We also do annual reports on each of the wave buoy sites and tide gauge sites, including joint return periods. We do bespoke analysis from some local authorities. So this is what's colloquially known as the Hurst graph, and shows beach volume after a significant renourishment project, and monitors when interventions are needed in management, or to inform further nourishments when they might be needed. And we also get involved in a lot of research projects. So, for example, we have a beach profile model called Shingle B on the website, which allows you to investigate the response of beach profiles to bimodal seas as well. And there's a plethora of other of kind of these types of added extras that are available on the website. So all of this you can access through our web portal, coastalmonitoring.org. This is just a landing page. And what you'll see across the top are some links to the real-time data. So there's a map which gives you an overview of what's going on at the moment, but you can click on any of these sites to get graphs of the real-time data. And you can also download data from there as well. We have the map viewer and catalogue, which holds our a catalogue of all of our historic quality controlled data, allows you to visualize it online, and also download it directly from that for a particular area of interest, if you'd like. We have some alternative ways to access some of that data as well. So we have WMS layers that you can load into your GIS projects. We have APIs, which you can use to build into models and things like that on our resources page. And this is also where you'll find our collaboration in research. And we have a separate page for the reporting that we do as well. Again, just to emphasize, everything is available through the Open Government License. So you can download anything from the website and use it for whatever you might want to use it for. And we just ask that you tell us kind of why you're using it, so that we can justify continued funding. And the key to this being a useful resource for resilience is really in the transparency and of what we're doing, and the consistency of the data that we provide. So as well as the data and the reports and the resources, you've also got access to all of our specifications, so you know exactly how we've collected all of the data and to what specific standards. As well as that, all of the quality control documents, so you know how that data has been processed and treated before it becomes available to you, and any kind of research and development work that we get involved in to explore new technology, we also make available, in particular if we are going to embrace new techniques into the future. Okay, so where does this kind of factor into thinking about resilience? So partly this is to do with the kind of length of the data, but we can feed into assessments at any stage of a kind of resilience model. So if you take this this kind of model here of resilience, you can see that we can help define risks, the risk element. We can help in the planning by understanding the historic coastal processes and how coastlines have responded to that kind of risk in the past, and also to help make predictions. Through the real-time monitoring, through incident response, you can assess how the coasts might absorb a particular risk when it does occur. Yeah, so hopefully we can help at kind of every stage of trying to understand this kind of resilient approach. And data length is a key part of that. So if you look at this data set, which is an example of beach volume change, and the two horizontal lines are an alert and a crisis level, where intervention has to happen. And at the top there, you can see a storm calendar with significant storms that have happened over the years. And what you can see here is that if we look over the last 15 months, things seem very healthy, and levels are well above crisis level. If we look over a slightly longer period here, we see actually things seem to have been quite stable over time, which is really encouraging. If we look over 5 years, we might imply that things are increasing over time. So actually maybe this is a pretty healthy system which is accreting. And we see a similar picture if we look over 10 years. When we look over 20 years, however, we do see that there appears to have been a reduction in overall volume, definitely some periods where it's fallen below the alert level, but seems to be quite healthy at the moment. And it's only when we look at the full data set, which in this case happens to be 30 years, that we see the significant reduction in beach volume happened over a certain period of time before we've come to a relatively stable state with just occasional reductions towards those alert and crisis levels. And in reality, this particular system is a renourishment and the kind of remobilization of material post that renourishment. But it's really only when we look at the full picture of this that we're able to kind of understand and predict what's going to happen into the future. The data, the long data sets that we have, also allowing us to start try to make some understand a little bit more about changes in wave climate and long-term changes in wave climate. And we have done some analysis to look at whether there seem to be any changes in wave height, wave period over the duration of our wave buoy monitoring. Now, what we've done here is we've only been looking at the extremes because those are the ones that have the impacts for flood and coastal erosion risk management. But the interesting thing is that actually wave height, we see almost no evidence of a trend in increasing wave height in any of our wave buoys. But we do definitely see trends in period, both the wind wave period and the swell period, which obviously has potential for impacting flooding and overtopping. We see not that much evidence of changes in direction and some evidence of changes in biomodality that tend to be clustered around the south coast. Now, 20 years is still a relatively young data set for this kind of analysis, but it is certainly providing us with some interesting first looks at how the wave climate around England might be changing. Our data has also been able to support larger scale risk and resilience assessments. So the National Coastal Erosion Risk Map work that was recently carried out, one of the big changes here was the incorporation of coastal monitoring data to help define the underlying recession rates. But also we assisted with underlying methods, thinking, and the profile positioning that was used for that. The main data that was used was LiDAR, as well as aerial photography, topography and asset data, which has resulted in the National Coastal Erosion Risk Map, which is now available through the SMP Explorer online. And we also work a lot with local projects that have been focused on risk and resilience as well, such as the Making Space for Sand project in the southwest, the Our Future Coast project in the northwest, and in particular advice on the installation of novel technologies, radar in this particular case to look at changes in bathymetry, and also to support strategies such as the Hurst to Lymington strategy, where we've been able to provide data information to support modelling, creating synthetic storm events, and obviously just providing the data that's needed to assess potential trigger points within an adaptation plan. We're always looking at ways in which we can improve, provide new things. One of those is we're looking at whether we can provide wave predictions as well as real-time data. And we're doing this through testing machine learning based wave prediction based on our historic data. We're using a test site at Milford to do that. Initial testing showed that some of the more basic statistically based machine learning models understandably did a bad job at predicting waves, but through testing other methodologies, the team working on this, which is geodata at the University of Southampton, have been seeing a lot more success, and we'll be able to publish this shortly. And they've also been piloting a web interface to make this kind of prediction information available, and to allow it to be a bit easier for the community to access that data as well. And we're always looking at new development, new ways to get better information or more efficient monitoring as well. And then I just wanted to end with a request really to the community. So we've been described as an essential programme that builds national resilience, and we're currently looking towards our next phase of monitoring, and we're putting together the business case to support that next phase of monitoring. And so what we ask from everyone here is, firstly, that you please do use the data that we have available. Go onto the website and explore what we have. Use the data and encourage other people to use it as well if they're not aware that the data is there. But also just to record how, where and why you're using the data, so that we can use that for case studies of just telling the importance of the data to the community. So you'll have opportunities to tell us when you're using the data. Firstly, when you download it, the website does ask you just to say why you're using it, but also we'll periodically come around with questionnaires and things. So please do engage with those when you see them. If you also tell other people that you use the data so that we're visible, so in acknowledgements, when you're presenting a report or a presentation, or just during discussions, just so people know where the data is coming from. And also, so please tell government that you'll use the data. So as they are funding it, if you can include it in funding applications, in your business cases, in your strategies, just so that it's really obvious that people are using and relying on the monitoring data that we provide. We'd also invite everyone to get involved. All of the regions hold annual meetings, stakeholder events, where you can get involved, learn more about your local programmes. Also, let us know what you need The stakeholder engagement is really important for us to make sure that you are getting the sort of data that you need to support the work that you do, and give us feedback. There's a feedback button on the website, but you can also just contact us through the contact details on the website as well. But give us feedback on the data, on the way the website works, on anything really, because we don't know unless you tell us in a lot of these cases. And through kind of doing all this, we can hopefully secure the monitoring into the future and then ensure that we have a resilient future for the monitoring, as well as allowing the monitoring data to support coastal resilience around the country. Thank you very much. Huge apologies again for that interruption in the middle. And if anyone's got questions, hopefully I can answer them.
Thank you for a really interesting presentation. Lots for people to think about, and sort of a bit of a call to action for people there at the end. So I would encourage people to respond to your request for explaining and describing how they've used your data and to make good use of that. There are a few questions coming in. If I could just encourage people to, I see somebody's got their hand up, just encourage you to type your question in either in the chat or the Q&A, and then I'll read it out, because there's a lot of people in the meeting. It's easier to manage that way. So we had a question sort of early on from Andrew asking about the thinking about responses, and you had damage as one of those potential responses you're interested in looking at. But how do you determine what damage is, or you quantify the damage, the extent of damage? What are you actually sort of measuring, I think is the question.
Yeah, so damage in that context is more to do with damage to assets. So that might be coastal defence assets themselves, so damage to coastal defence structures, for example, or to other I guess built structures that are in the coastal environment. Changes to the beach itself, to the beach volume, and to the profile, we don't classify that as damage per se, it's just change. But that is also monitored, and we work with the local authorities and the local risk management authorities, so that if there is an event which causes significant change, which they need additional monitoring for, then we do post-storm, post-event surveys for them to make sure that we do capture those kind of big changes or big damage that might happen.
And then sort of slightly follows on, thinking about coastal defence assets registry. I think that's really interesting that you have all that, but presumably that only includes at the moment or built defences. What about natural defences? So where people are using sort of natural nature-based solutions and things, are you including that in the inventory?
So the inventory, if you explore it through the website, so it does involve, so it does include data on some of the natural defences as well. So for example, beach volume and beach profile, you can view alongside the other assets, so you can see them in context. The nature-based solutions, we do monitor. So for example, managed realignment sites, for example, get higher level of monitoring than maybe some other sites would get, but they are not currently within the kind of asset register, but they are monitored regularly.
So I think that answers another question from Kate about that was, are you monitoring those nature-based solutions? So would it be all nature-based solutions? You mentioned sort of managed realignment, but are there other types of nature-based solutions that you're keeping a track of?
So I mean, one of the classic ones that we maybe, because it's been so established, we maybe don't see it as a nature-based solution, but beach nourishment and recycling is probably one of the key ones, especially here on the south coast, and that really does factor into our risk assessments of when we're monitoring. But we do require people to kind of let us know when nature-based solutions are going in, and then we can discuss with them the types of monitoring that we can do. But yes, they should all be captured within some of our kind of monitoring types.
Yeah. And then another question, just thinking about, are there other ways in which communities might be able to support the collection of data or supplement to add value to what you have? Is it sort of only an academic source, or is there some like citizen science type approach to collecting additional data?
Yeah, so we do have some of those schemes in place. A good example of that is probably the Coast Snap project, which where we have a number of kind of docks in different locations where you can put a camera, put your phone, and you can take a photograph at a specific location, upload it to the website, and then it gives us a kind of time series of images of a particular location. So we do have kind of citizen science types things associated with that, and with some of the research projects that we get involved with as well. The core data on the website has to meet the specifications and standards that we have to make sure that it's suitable for the kind of flood and coast erosion risk management need. So in that case, it tends not to be in the main database, but you'll find that in the resources page of our website.
And just a question I had briefly at the end, just following on from that, perhaps, is it was interesting. You sort of mentioned talking about making the data available to communities, like the wave data and things. Do you know how much the public access the data sets? Is it more widely used than the sort of academic or professional community?
It is. I know that it's used a lot by things like wild swimming groups. We have one local resident who uses the API to control automated shutters on his house to shut the shutters when it gets too stormy out. So yeah, so we do. Like I said, we ask people when they're downloading data or signing up for APIs and things to just let us know what they're doing. And so we do keep track of those kind of community uses of the data as well.
That's really good. Right, well, we're almost out of time here. Just again, I'd like to say thank you very much for a really interesting presentation and lots of information there about how we can make use of the data that you have. So I'd encourage people to have a look at your website, but also to respond to the questions that you had, because that's obviously very important for maintaining data sources like this, which I think are probably used by a lot of people here on the call. So I'd encourage people to react to your call to action. Obviously, we'll be sharing the slides afterwards, so people will be able to see those and look again at the information that Charlie was looking for, and that'd be really helpful for her. Other than that, I'm just going to finish off by saying thank you to you all for attending, and we'll be in touch with you soon about details of the next webinar. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you Charlie for a really interesting presentation that I think brought a lot of people up to speed with what the observatory is doing. It's great.
Thanks very much everyone.
Thank you.